Bet UK is just 2 weeks away. Are you ready to join 30,000 attendees, 600 plus exhibitors on 7 content stages from 120 countries, and see Louis Theroux, Dame Darcy Bustle, Jason Arde, Laurel Kana, Baroness Floella Benjamin, Dan Fitzpatrick, Mr. PICT, and so much more? I might need to bring my trainers. The best part? Educators go free! Get your ticket now at uk.betshow.com/visitor-registration.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
Introducing Eton X from Eton College, a diverse range of quality online courses enabling young people to aspire and excel. Designed for self-study, these web-based courses empower your students with essential leadership, communication, and academic skills for success at school and beyond. Our Study Skills course sharpens their learning abilities, while the AI Fundamentals course equips them with vital digital know-how in a fast-changing world. Other popular courses include verbal communication, critical thinking, writing skills, resilience, creative problem solving, and many more. Offer the Eton X curriculum in your school for free. Visit etonx.com to find out more.
Hello everybody and welcome to TTR this lovely Monday evening. We've got a wonderful show for you coming up all about school interview days, and the big question we're asking this evening is, what would you add or what would you take away from the school interview day process? Now we're going to run through all the classics this evening. The classics like the interview lesson, the interview panel, the student panel, the data task or task during the interview, the issue of internal candidates, the issue of meeting other candidates when you don't really want to. We're going to hopefully explore all of those this evening in terms of what we would add or what we would take away from school interview days. And are school interview days archaic in their current form? That might be another question I'm going to ask people this evening is, are we moving to a point where in other industries outside of teaching, interview days are much shorter, much more succinct, much more effective? Or are school interview days the way they are because they need to be the way they are? These are all questions we're going to explore tonight. The reason I wanted to do this show is because I sometimes get frustrated with, I guess, the way the profession goes about things in a way that might be disconnected from the outside world. You know, you think about even outside of interview days, you think about the application process for jobs. You think about the lead up to getting an actual job and the way that part of things is put together. It's sometimes interesting to look at it and say, well, is this modern? Is this progressive? Is this what all the top companies in the world are doing, or are schools stuck in a vortex? Certainly it's something worth asking and worth exploring in my opinion. So tonight I've got, hopefully, if we can connect them all, we've got Kenneth, who is a maths and tech teacher, which is great. We've got Stephen, who is a lead practitioner in computing and careers. And hopefully we've got Dr. Jill Berry, who is a novelist, writer, consultant, and former school leader. So hopefully we've got some very interesting panelists to discuss all of these things with. Just before we kick off, it would be a really good time for me to mention that this show is brought to you live and direct by the good people at John Catt Educational, who support all of our shows here at Teachers Talk Radio. They publish professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. If you visit the John Catt website, which is johncatbookshop.com, if you like reading, if you like your professional development, then you can visit their website and you can get 20% off anything on their website by using the code JCTTR2324. That's JCTTR2324. And you just visit the John Catt Bookshop at johncatbookshop.com and you can explore the full range of titles. I'm just going to hopefully say hi to some guests. Jill, are you there first off? If you want to unmute button.
I am.
There you go.
You
Hello.
can hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear. How are you this evening?
Excellent.
Good stuff. Excellent. Good news. And we'll check. We've got Kenneth here. Kenneth, are you there?
Certainly am, Tom. Can you hear me loud and clear?
Excellent. Can hear you absolutely loud and clear. I'm not sure we've connected Stephen yet, but hopefully we can connect him up as well. So I'll start with you two then. My big overarching question was, what would you add or take away from school interview days? Jill, can I start with you on this? What's the first thing that came to your mind?
Well, thinking about it, Tom, I've been involved in a lot of interviews. I've had a lot of interviews in my 30-year career, and I've been involved in interviewing other people. And I think the most important thing we need to take away is the fear. We have to find ways of making the process as humane as possible so that we enable people to shine and show what they can do rather than trying to catch them out and make the process more difficult for them. So thinking about how we can make interview days interviewee friendly rather than just seeing them from the point of view of the selection panel. Is that helpful?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And hopefully we can sort of explore in this show what sort of things that might involve, sort of adding or taking away. But completely agree that fear is a massive factor. Somebody actually tweeted, I'll read you this. Somebody said, this is Jen Addy tweeted this. I once had an interview where I was given the questions 15 minutes before the interview and was able to make notes. It was really helpful and I felt I was able to give better, more thorough answers. Do you sort of buy into that, Jill, that sort of approach?
I do. It was one of the things I was thinking of. So giving people more information about what will be expected from them, it doesn't mean that they will be over-rehearsed and over-prepared and just trotting out what they think is the right answer. It just means they will go into it with a better sense of how they can show themselves as positively as possible. So the most positive face, not a false face. And I think that's one thing that we ought to be prepared to consider.
Do you think the flip side to that might be that people would even within 15 minutes, half an hour, whatever, do you think the flip side might be that you'd get maybe more scripted answers or something? I don't know. I'm trying to think what the devil's advocate to that approach might be.
I think you'd get more thoughtful answers, but I think that's a good thing. And I'm sure most people recognise that an interview is a two-way process. This is about you finding whether it's a fit for you, as well as them finding out whether you are in alignment with them. And it's in nobody's best interest to try and give the right answer and talk yourself into a job which isn't the right job for you and you're not the right person for them. So I will often say, Tom, not getting a job is not the worst thing that can happen to you, but getting the wrong job could be. So it doesn't want to be artificial and scripted and false. It does want to be thoughtful and reflective and honest, and that's in everyone's best interests.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And to be fair, that's not something that I often think, and I'm sure a lot of people often think, is what you've just said about getting the wrong job. It's almost like the duty of the process to give you and the employer the best possible shot of avoiding anything that is going to cause pain further down the line. And definitely. That's where, like you say, even just little tweaks like the interview questions and sort of sharing those or whatever it is, anything you can do to help you as a candidate and also as the employer to get a better picture of whether that person is the right fit or not, I think is personally, I think that's a good thing. I'll come back to you, Jill. I've got so many more things to sort of ask you as we go through. Kenneth, can I ask you the overarching question? What would you add or what would you take away from the interview process?
Yeah, of course. And I think I agree with a lot of what Jill is saying. One of the things that I wrote down on my notes before coming on was this idea of giving candidates preparation time. But and again, I've been on both sides. I've prepared for interviews. I've been on the other side of the table. I've sat in on kids' interviews, which I know, are kid panels that we're going to talk about later. But I think for me, the words that I wrote down there from Jill was the ability to shine. And then I wrote down rather than a performance. And my worry and concern, with giving them too much time is that idea that candidates, and I include myself in this, what I'm saying, I'm not saying this is a negative thing, but you can script answers, you can put them into broad categories and script what people want to hear. And that's not the point. Like Jill said, it's a two-way process that people want. I want honesty. I want a genuine love of education. I want a genuine love of maths or technologies. I have a responsibility for CDT and computing science as well. I just want to hear an honest sort of feeling on why they love their job, why they do what they do, and how good they are at what they do, rather than scripted responses. And I think that's really important for me is getting. I don't think there is a perfect system, and I don't think, I think there's always room for improvement, which is why we're here to talk about it. But I think we need to get as much honesty and genuine desire for the job that they're applying for.
So are you not a fan of giving the questions in general?
I think in general, I would be worried about the amount of time that you give. I don't want scripted answers, and I worry that if you gave them the night before or the day before or the week before, I would worry that people would just memorize responses and rote learn what you want to hear. But at the same time, I think, and I've sat and been, I think myself as I'm an okay talker, but I've been to places where or interviewed people who are brilliant teachers, but don't do well in interview because they find that pressure really, really difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I wonder as well, and I'll ask this later on, is, why are teacher interviews so long and so extensive? Compared to a lot of other industries, they are very sort of exhaustive in terms of, the hoops. And you imagine some of these interviews are like 2 or 3 days. Yeah, it's crazy.
And the expectation to talk at length. I mean, I don't know if you can tell from the accent. I'm from the dulcet north of Scotland, but it's an expectation up here, or not seen as an expectation, but it's certainly something that when you're doing interviews, that you'll be asked a question and you'll be asked to talk for around about 5 minutes. For a traditional panel interview with head teachers and other people, maybe not so much the kids and the panels with them, but why are we talking for 5 minutes, or why are we aiming to talk for 5 minutes? Why are we not just having a conversation and pulling out some genuine skills, qualities, out of that instead?
Absolutely. I'll bring Stephen in next. Stephen, are you there?
I am. How are you, Tom?
Wonderful, not too bad. And yourself?
Yeah, very good, thank you.
Excellent. Can I ask you the overarching question? What would you add or take away from school interview days?
So my tweet when you were asking last week was that I would get rid of the pupil panel. So I think for me, sometimes I think teacher interviews are quite often linked towards extroverts, particularly people who are very quick at thinking on their feet. Actually, I think that there are a broad range of professionals who maybe don't necessarily thrive in that sort of environment, but have a lot to offer to students in the classroom. So I think actually being mindful of, for example, if you've got a teacher who is someone who suffers from anxiety actually that tell me an answer now, and actually they're overthinking after 3 seconds of thinking time. Oh, I've got speaks right now. Actually, sometimes it can go, you know, it can rule out certain people who have a lot to offer. In terms of the pupil panel, I think my experiences of them. So I you know, I've got to admit at this stage, I don't think I've ever actually been offered a job where there has been a pupil panel. So that might be part of the reason for my hatred for them. However, you know, actually, the wide range of experience that I've had in them. So I've had the what's your favourite joke question, which, as you know, someone who's gone preparing for an interview day, has gone in with quite a lot of serious information in my head. Being hit with that was a bit of a curveball the first time I came across that. I think that was my first pupil panel. What sort of superhero I'm most like and why.
Oh God.
But also I've had the opposite extreme of they've basically been given the same sort of questions you'd expect to receive from the head teacher, and questions such as what would you do to improve attainment across the school, and trying to convey that information, which, you know, quite a lot of it is actually processes that the students maybe are less aware of, processes that maybe don't want to be aware of, actually higher expectations of them. You know, that you know, their improved outcomes is a great thing for them, but actually the processes that you go through to get there maybe not so enjoyable for them potentially. But yeah, you know, I think having had both extremes of a completely ridiculous interview where actually I just found it such a curveball, I really struggled, onto, well, actually the head teacher's in the room observing this pupil panel. Actually, why is this not questions being asked by the head teacher?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like, I think I've only been part of one interview that's involved a proper student panel, as people are describing it. You know, I've been on a few where there's been tours, which is sort of like that because the students are asking you questions while you're going around the tour. But in terms of that idea where the students are on a panel and you go in, it's like an interview with students. I've only ever had that once. I don't really know what my view is. Like, I agree with everything you just said, though. Everything you just said makes sense to me, like perfect sense. Jill, I wondered whether you. Oh, just before I bring in Jill again, big shout out to Christian who's listening. Christian, you gave a massive shout out to TTR the other day and my shows. So, thanks for joining in. Thanks for listening. Thanks for sharing that with your friends. That was much appreciated. A really nice surprise the other day. Jill, is there anything you have in terms of a view on student panels?
It's not something we made a lot of use of in the school where I was a head, but obviously anyone applying for a teaching position did do some teaching. And you need to see how people are in terms of their relationship with students. You need to see whether there is warmth and connection and commitment.
But couldn't you do that in the interview lesson? Wouldn't that be the interview lesson?
That's what I'm saying. I think if they're teaching, you have the opportunity to see that. And if you can see that, and also there may be other opportunities during the day when they're interacting with pupils. So I'm not sure that you need to do a pupil panel. When I was involved in pupil panels myself, I quite enjoyed it. I quite like talking to students and listening to them. And building relationships, even within a constrained interview situation. But I accept Stephen's point, and there can be some ridiculous questions. So it is about relationships. I mean, teaching and leading in schools is all about relationships. If at the beginning of the formal panel interview, which we always had at the end of the day, I would always ask each candidate to tell me how their lesson went. Whether if they had to do the same lesson the following day with the same group of pupils on the same topic, they would do anything differently. And it was always interesting to hear their reflections about their lesson. I wanted to hear that they had enjoyed it, but I also wanted to hear that they were self-aware and recognise that actually knowing that class, maybe if they did the lesson again, they would do certain things differently. And I hope they'd have the confidence to admit that. But that's the whole point of putting them in a situation with pupils. It's to look at their capacity to build relationships, to communicate, to show warmth and humanity, perhaps humour. You want them to be themselves as far as possible.
Yeah. You want to, I guess you want to see how
natural they can be, and the sort of connectivity they might have in those sort of contexts, I think. And I've never been a head teacher, so I've never been sort of in that position, but that's what I would imagine those situations are there for. I mean, Kenneth, have you got a view on the whole student panel thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the important thing is at some point, and we talk a lot about pupil panel being an option. We talk about observations being an option. We talk about walk rounds, which, in my experience, isn't really it's not really happening as much post-COVID as we used to. But for me, it's exactly what we were talking about. Giving the kids the opportunity to speak to candidates is really powerful, giving them a choice and a voice and an opinion. But of course, the pupils aren't going to know about the nuances of the skills and qualities which make an effective teacher or an effective leader or, an effective candidate or whatever we're interviewing for. But it's that human element of teaching. It's that they are our customers, if you like, for lack of a better term. We need to talk to these learners on a daily basis. We talk to kids probably more than we talk to the adults around us on a daily basis. So I think it's really important that people get the opportunity to see candidates, talking to the kids. I don't know how others have worked it, whether it's been facilitated by staff members so that it's not just, the participant and the kids. I've always sort of sat on the side, and you do pick up a lot of those softer skills that the kids maybe aren't really getting a hold of. But at the same time, I find, in my experience, candidates are much more relaxed with young people than they are with senior leadership, head teachers, that kind of idea.
Jill, I want to ask you, with your former school leader sort of hat on, were the candidates where you were like, after the interview, this person's amazing, and then the lesson sort of fell down, or the student panel fell down, or another element fell down, and it was like chalk and cheese?
Not often.
Does that ever happen?
Yeah, I mean, usually I think that there was a degree of consistency, but the lesson was really important. If they'd done well in some areas, but actually the lesson had not been successful, I would be very reluctant to employ someone in a teaching capacity. I think everybody's nervous at interview, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's part and parcel of wanting to do well, of wanting the job. You have to be able to see through the nervousness to their capacity to do the job. If I can give an example, I remember once interviewing a biology teacher. It was a temporary contract. Sadly, my head of biology was unwell, and we were looking for someone to fill in. And the woman who we interviewed one of the women was very nervous. She was incredibly nervous. She said she hadn't had an interview for a long time, and she wanted the job very badly. She didn't interview terribly well, but when she started to talk about teaching biology, and actually working with pupils, honestly, she lit up. Her eyes, her everything. And I thought, this is someone I want to put before the students in my school. And when I rang to offer the job, she said, I'm so pleased, but I'm surprised because I didn't think I interviewed well. And I said, to be completely honest, you didn't interview well. But when you talked about teaching, you came alive. And if interview panels can't see through the nervousness to the potential and the capacity that someone has, they're not doing their job. So it's just about, and it's looking for the positives, not trying to trip people up, not trying to put them under pressure to see how they cope with pressure. That isn't necessary. No. But you do need to be astute, you do need to have insight, and you need to be clear about what's important, what matters most. And what matters most to a teaching job is how they will connect and get through to students and care about the students and be committed to supporting the students to be their best. If it's a leadership role, they also need to demonstrate that they can do that with colleagues. Those are the things that matter most, in my view. And we have to think, how can we structure the day so that we are able to see what potential this person has? Is that helpful, Tom?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Stephen, out of interest, because people who are just joining us, Stephen was saying that he would take away the sort of student panel element in an ideal world from an interview day. What would you replace that with, or would you literally just go interview, or would you just be having your interview lesson as the sort of thing where you see them around the kids and stuff?
I think so. There are lots of different things that are involved in an interview day. So for me, actually, that how they engage with students in the classroom is obviously evident from your interview lesson. Quite often you are given that tour of the school. And I think actually that opportunity to go around with a small group of students, talking to them about, what do you like about the school, things that they would want to develop in the school, actually your ideas coming into the role, etc. Actually, that sort of informal walking around, that natural conversation. I think we were talking before about actually how an interview can come across as being, scripted answers, very long answers, whereas actually having a nice conversation can actually be the better way of drawing out information from people. And I think the same's true in terms of how people get along with students. Actually, if you've got, two students showing a candidate round, if you're herding around all your candidates, so you've got 6 or 8 candidates or however many you've got, who are all walking around the site together, obviously that's very difficult. But if you've got a small group of students with one candidate, for example, and actually they can have that conversation, then actually get those student ambassadors, whatever you'd call them in your school, to give a bit of feedback on, what they would like to talk to,
students,
what they would add to the school, etc. I think that's a way of getting that sort of student input into the process, but without having another sit down round table sort of interview.
Yeah, you missed what I said. I said student spies. It's like sent off to spy, find out info. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I totally, absolutely makes sense. I just wonder, did you say that you've had those student panel experiences and interviews that you've gone for?
Yeah.
And you sort of mentioned why they went wrong. I mean, can you sort of expand on that a little bit, just in terms of what exactly was it that you really didn't like?
So I think it's just that variance. So the way that I work, the way that I prepare for interviews, I do very rigorously prepare for interview. And actually, when you get through a schedule for the day, actually that's the one thing that it's really hard to kind of prepare your thoughts on. So actually you prepare for your interview. What sort of questions are likely to come up? What sort of experience do I need to have in mind here? Or you obviously prepare for your lesson or any presentation that you need to do. Actually, it's just the wild variety in the questions that you get in a student panel. I'm there looking up the night before. Oh, I just need to remind myself of my favourite jokes in case I get hit with that one again. But those sort of things. Actually, you don't want to be in a situation where your mind goes completely blank. I think that's painful when you're in your interview with the head teacher or senior leader, etc. But actually, within the student panel, if you just can't think of something, actually, that is, it makes the conversation very difficult.
Well, I think Stephen, is that me dropping or is that Stephen dropping? I'm not sure. But yeah, no, I got the gist of what Stephen was saying. Jill, I'll go on to you, or back to you. In terms of sort of the tasks, like some interviews have tasks in them. Did you do all that? Did you have tasks in your interviews, like data tasks, like create a spreadsheet showing, the levels of progress on this and this and this? Did you do all that or not?
I did do tasks. I never did anything with spreadsheets because I never got the joy of spreadsheets myself, Tom. So that didn't light my fire. Particularly for leadership roles, I was quite interested in how they could demonstrate quick thinking and good judgment in the moment. So one of the things I quite liked to do with, for example, senior leadership roles was to give the candidates a number of potential emails. You go back to your office after break or after teaching, and you see a number of quite difficult emails that have all arrived at the same time. So how do you prioritize them? What do you delegate? What do you leave? Where do you send holding emails? And I think it's interesting to do something like that as a group. So if you've got 4 candidates, they've all had the same emails, they've had time to think about it, work out a priority order, and then get them to discuss it together, and I would observe. And that I found really interesting. Wow. Because you're looking at their judgment.
Jill, do you want to go on The Apprentice?
Yeah, no, well, I wouldn't say you're fired at the end. I might say, you're hired.
And also, where's the option
actually...
to burn? Where's the option to burn the computer if there's like 10 emails and you just don't want to? Can we literally get a match and burn the computer? Is that one of the options we have?
It's not the most constructive response, Tom. I wouldn't have employed you if you suggested that. But you're also looking at how they interact with one another. And I can remember, I talked about this recently, one candidate in an interview, having said what she thought, listened to the others, and then said, actually, having listened to everybody else, I think I'd like to change my mind. And I thought, wow, that is amazing.
No,
it's real strength.
Up, Jill. I see that.
No, she wasn't. No. She wasn't. What she was saying was that she'd listened and reflected and rethought. And it's very, very courageous to say that in an interview, because most people think I've got to stick to my line. I've got to show that I won't be swayed. And she was confident enough to say, actually, I think in retrospect, I would change my direction here, because making a U-turn is a strength, not a weakness, Tom. Having the courage to admit, okay, maybe I need to rethink that. I'm impressed with that. So that was the kind of task that I quite like to do. I would never give them a spreadsheet task or a data task, because I don't think those are the key skills you're looking for. I think you're looking for communication, you're looking for relationships, you're looking for integrity, you're looking for judgment. To me, those are the things that trump your ability to crunch data. You can learn crunching data. You can learn how to use spreadsheets, but do you have the personal qualities, the strength of character to be able to solve problems, to stay calm, to communicate clearly, even when you're under pressure? That's what the tasks, I think, need to establish.
Do you know what? I just love this, Jill. I got this vision of you as Thingy-Mabob on the Traitors with like the black cloak on, like in the room. So I don't know if you've seen that program. Sort of.
And Claudia models herself on me, Tom. Claudia, I've told her all she knows.
That's Claudia. Yeah. I just have this vision, and you're like, one of you is a traitor. You're the internal candidate. The rest of you have a chance at this job.
You watch too much television, Tom, I think.
Yeah, I know. Kenneth, tasks. Do you have any creative tasks or any tasks that you've done on an interview where you thought, I once got a task, right, which was to plan. So my interview lesson on a job I went for wasn't given to me in advance. So I knew I had to teach a lesson, but I didn't know what the lesson was about.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I turned up and I did the interview part wasn't first. I literally walked in and they were like, you've got 20 minutes to plan this lesson. There's a computer and then you're going to deliver it. Can you imagine that?
Yeah, that just sounds crazy. I mean, I am a fan of maths teacher, fan of data, fan of number crunching, fan of all these things in terms of, but for leadership roles, I do think it's really, really important that all teachers engage in the story of the numbers of their department. As a principal teacher, I think it's my job to put forward the vision and values of my department and my faculty. But at the same time, I can't just be the keeper of all the attainment. And yeah, there is something to be said for we're not just getting kids through exams, and I agree with that. We have to make them be, the leaders of tomorrow and all, that kind of stuff. But at the same time, a lot of what we do is based on, getting the best out of our young people, and we can tell that through the numbers. So for me, I think all teachers should be engaging in that, but I really do think that that's not something for a classroom teacher role, because they would or should definitely be supported by their principal teachers in terms of that number crunching. So I would never ask a classroom teacher to number crunch or to create spreadsheets. But
across that for a classroom teacher level role, but I mean leadership, maybe head of department or above. I think
that's it. It's showing that strategic leadership. It's showing that idea. And the classic one that I have seen and used and had done to me in the past as well is, giving them a set of data, last year's attainment results or a historical pattern of the last 4 or 5 years, and looking at the short, medium and long-term goals. You know, I completely agree with Jill in terms of thinking on your feet, as you would have probably said there, Tom, with regards to that lesson. You know, that's one of the things they're probably trying to look at there. But at the same time, we need to have, you know, staff members who or leaders especially, who are not just looking a day or a week in advance. They've got to have, what do I prioritize in terms of my short-term goals? That's a quick win, easy fix, I get that done. Middle, you know, leadership, you know, or medium goals, what can I do this year? And then that kind of Olympic cycle, what can I do in the next 3 to 4 years? What's the long-term goal, to spin round some of the numbers? Yeah, you'd expect that from a maths teacher, though.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I just want to give a shout out to people listening along. We've had lots of people dipping in and out this evening. Noreen's just popped in. We've got Mr. Das, who's always a listener on TTR. Thank you, Mr. Das, for always tuning in. We really appreciate that. We've got Hannah, we've got Catherine, we've got Leanne, we've got Miss Al-Bashir, we've got Mrs. Zygmunt, we've got Sammy, we've got Joanna, Liam, Andrew, and lots of other people. If you want to call in, I would really appreciate if you click the little button on the bottom left. You can join us. We've got 3 on the panel, which is Jill, Kenneth, and Stephen. But if you want to join in and share what you would add or take away from an interview day, then please feel free to do so. You can just click the little button on the bottom left-hand side, the little microphone icon, and you can get involved in the conversation. As always, our show this evening is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. If you haven't already, you can check out all their latest releases at johncattbookshop.com, and you can use the code JCTTR2324 to get 20% off any book order at the John Catt website. So if you're interested in professional development and reading, cash in with your Teachers Talk Radio discount using the code JCTTR2324. Noreen's called in. Noreen, good evening.
Hi, Tom. Hi, everyone.
Hello, how are you?
I'm not too bad, thank you.
Excellent. So tell me, what would you add or take away from the interview
I
day?
requested the mic in order to ask a question, actually.
Oh, here we go. Is this a task, though, Noreen? Is this part of Jill Berry's interview task?
No,
has she spoken to you before this?
I don't think we've spoken on the interviews, actually. But yes, it's
go
a
on.
question for Jill. As people know that, you may know that for head teachers, the interviews are conducted by panels of governors. Now, Jill has been a head. I'd like to ask Jill, what would she recommend that we as governors either take away or add to head teacher interviews, please?
Oh, that's good. Jill.
Hi, Noreen. It's good to connect with you, even only virtually, not seeing you for ages. Thank you for your question. And I've enjoyed interacting with governors, both on interview panels when I was a head. I had 4 interviews for headship, I got the 4th, but also involving governors on interview panels for senior staff in my own school when I was a head, because they have brilliant objective insights. And I think it's good for the school to see governors actually involved in the process of selecting leaders in our schools. I think, again, it's about relationships. You know, when you're looking at headship, you will be working so closely with these governors or trustees. And I think you're looking for some kind of alignment, for some consistency in terms of vision and values. At the same time, there needs to be mutual support and mutual challenge. In order for it to be good for the school, there needs to be some complementarity of skills and temperament, so that you're not just appointing in your own image, and you're bringing in a diversity of expertise and skills and strengths and insights. So an underpinning ethos that you all have a consistent educational philosophy. You believe in the same kinds of priorities, but actually you're all coming at it with different skills and strengths, and you bring different things to the table. That's what I would hope for from governors if I were going into a headship interview.
Thank you, Jill. That's a really important point which you've touched upon about visions and values and ethos. If they aren't aligned, if the executive leaders and the non-executive leadership aren't aligned in the vision and values, then it won't work.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, it's really good. Yeah, no, it's a really good point. Thanks, Noreen. If you've got, feel free to stick around if you have anything else that you want to sort of interject with or add. Stephen, I just want to come to you next, and then maybe Kenneth, and then back to Jill. On this issue of I wanted to ask you about interview questions next. Now, obviously, I'm putting you on the spot here, so feel free to sort of think about it. But the question I was going to ask you was your favourite interview question, or one of your favourites, and your least favourite interview question, and potentially your curveball question, which may actually be a good or bad question. But good question, bad question, curveball question. Stephen, I don't know whether you've got anything on any of those three. Like a question you hate.
I think there's often the question that you get asked of the where do you see yourself in 5 years' time. I did see a tweet that made me chuckle the other day, which was someone that put when you ask that question, mate, I'm a millennial, I don't know where I'm going to be tomorrow. I did quite like that sort of humorous response. But yeah, that one of what are they looking for here? Are they looking for someone who's going to be content in this role? And maybe the school doesn't think that there's going to be any development opportunities, or like if you're interviewing for a teacher role, actually, is that going to upset someone if you say that I want to be the head of department? Actually, it's the trying to work out what the right answer is there. It's sometimes a little bit challenging. But yeah, I think it's good to know. Is this member of staff wanting to get certain amounts of development? And if there are opportunities internally, great, they can go for them. Is the school happy to train up people who are then going to lead in other places, etc.? I think that probably reveals a little bit about the ethos of the school.
Yeah.
Their response to that sort of answer. But I think from the candidate side of things, it can be quite challenging to know what they're looking for on that one.
Would you, Stephen, do the bit at the end where they say, and have you got any questions for us? Do you always have one, or do you say, no, I don't think I have?
So for my current role, so I've been asked a really good question during the interview itself. So they'd given me a tour of the school, and they said to me, we were looking for a leader in the school. So it's for my lead practitioner role, this interview. So they said, we're looking for leaders who've got a good attention to detail. Can you give us your appraisal of the strengths and weaknesses of this school? And I thought that was a really good question. I mean, quite on the spot up question, but I really like the question. So I gave my answer, and I think in that one, we got to the end of the interview and they said to me, "Have you got any questions for us?" And I said, "I'm going to ask you the same. What are the strengths and weaknesses of your school?" So actually, I thought being able to have that conversation both ways actually is what I'm seeing aligned with what they're seeing. I thought that was quite a good process overall.
But you've got to, I mean, that's you've got to have confidence there, haven't you, as the interviewee? You've got to be able to sort of be honest, haven't you, and authentic. It's for some that might be difficult, I guess, to say what tell us what our weaknesses are. Essentially, that's brave on both parties, isn't it? It's brave to ask the question. It sounds really good though. I like it. Yeah. Kenneth, what about you? Have you got any sort of interview questions that you like or dislike?
Yeah, I mean, I had some thinking time there, so hopefully
you're the lucky one. Yeah.
Going back to Stephen's point there about like the endings, like you've got to be ballsy to say that, but the classic stuff of you can only lose the job in that time, but it's part of that, and we go right back to the start about making this really, really much more of a conversation rather than and making it less nerve-wracking for the candidates. That's something that should be promoted, I think, more, that idea of it's a two-way conversation coming at us, and I would welcome that from the other side of the table, but having said that, being on being interviewed, you've got it takes some guts to do that. I think for me, some of my favorite questions are things that allow me to talk about what I love doing, and that is teaching, and that is maths. I'm not trying to be Mr. Ego, but at the same time, a sort of conversation of the skills and qualities, or a why why have you applied for this job in this school? I think is a time for a candidate really to talk about why they love teaching, why they love their subject, why they've chosen to apply for the school. I genuinely believe you should never apply for a job that you don't actually want. Don't do it for experience of interview, or I'm not going to get this. And going back to the kind of kids, I've had the superhero question, and I've had the superpower and all that kind of stuff. But one of the questions that I got in the pupil panel of the current job that I'm in was, what is your favourite bit of maths to teach? And I won't bore you with the stock response, but not the stock response, but the response that I gave is the long response. But it allowed me to be enthusiastic about something that I am passionate about and try and get that across to the kids. And I was successful. I don't know if the kids liked me, because that is another question that I would have that perhaps we could go on to talk about at some point, would be to discuss that idea that just because the kids have had their say and the kids pick their favourite doesn't necessarily mean that's who the head teacher and the other important decision makers appoint. I wonder, and I don't have experience either way, anything that I've been involved with, it's been quite fair, but who does make the final decision, if you have got multiple different elements to it. In terms of my least favourite, I was asked once, what's your biggest weakness? And I would say that's probably a curveball as well. Like,
I've had that. I was going to mention that question actually in a bit, so you've ruined it all.
I'm sorry, Tom. I'm sorry.
Tell me why.
But I just think, for me, that there is the answer where you try and be funny about it, and you go, oh, my biggest weakness is working too hard, is caring too much. And if I heard that, I would just be like, nah, nonsense. Like,
or if you're Amanda Spielman, you could say, we should have released our outstanding webinars earlier. That's what we should have done. That's the biggest weakness I've got. I should have released our incredible materials earlier.
But how do you deal? What as an interviewer you wanting to hear? Are you wanting to hear about a person who is honest and says, well, my timekeeping is not great, or I'm not great at meeting deadlines, or or are you wanting a stock funny response? To me, that question, when it was asked, it was my least favourite. It was a curveball, because I went, well, what do you want from me here? What's the answer?
But maybe they want. I'll ask Jill and Noreen. If Noreen, are you still there?
I am.
What do you think of that question? You must have done a fair few interviews. What do you think of that one? The weaknesses question.
Can you hear me, Tom?
I can hear both of you, but I was just asking Noreen to start with, if she's still there.
You go first, Noreen.
Thank you. I mean, it's a personal choice, I suppose, but I don't think it's that bad a question. It allows you, for example, a head teacher, they might say, and we've had that before, that I haven't had that much experience in doing finance. So I would like, if I get the job, I would like some more training or some more mentoring to look at budgets, because at the end of the day, they'll be doing a lot of that. But till you become a head teacher, you don't actually run the whole school budget. So if somebody were to say that to me in an interview, I'd say, well, fair dues, and if appointed, we'll make sure that they get the support they needed.
Yeah. I mean, this is sort of what I was saying is, I get what Ken is saying, in the sense that it basically puts the person on the spot, doesn't it? I mean, usually you would think there's probably going to be some sort of question like that, but even when it comes, you're still like I've had one where it proper caught me out. I was like, what am I going to say? For some reason, I hadn't prepped for that question at all. I was like, no, whatever. And then it came up, and I was like, what should I say? And then I can't even remember what I said, but I remember thinking afterwards, I shouldn't have said that. It was an awful thing. Don't worry, Jill. It wasn't about having a box of matches and burning down the ICT suite. But it was probably not a very good answer. Jill, what is your thoughts on this?
The reason I asked if you could hear me, the audio is breaking up at this end, which means probably my audio is breaking up. But anyway, I'll carry on regardless. First of all, I want to talk to you later about your pyromania, Tom, and try and give you some help. Secondly, I think it's a good question because what you're looking for is self-awareness. And I think the way to answer it is to be honest and say, this is something I'm working on, but show that A, you're aware of it, B, you're committed to doing something about it, and maybe even saying, and this is what I am doing already to try to improve in that area. So it doesn't have to be a bear trap of a question. It's an opportunity to show that you are reflective, you're honest, and you're self-aware.
No, brilliant. No, I like it. I mean, Jill, have you got anything on this whole issue of like favorite questions, or questions where you think, oh, I asked that a few times and I didn't really get anywhere with it, so I'll pass on that one?
I always remember when I was interviewed for the headship that I got, one of the questions one of the governors asked was, what do you think is the worst mistake a new head coming into this school could make? I thought that was a really good question. And I hadn't anticipated it, so I didn't have a prepared answer, but I found myself saying not to listen. This is a good school. You would be taking over from a successful head. If you came in and you didn't listen very carefully to what people were saying about the strengths of the school, as well as the opportunities for development, that would be a terrible mistake. So I like that question. The other question I always recommend people give thought to beforehand, and it's not the where do you see yourself in 5 years, but it's a similar thing. Yeah. If we appointed you today, how long do you think you might be here for and why? And I was asked that question for headship. And again, I hadn't really got a thoughtful answer, but I think it's a good question to prepare. How long do you think you would need to commit to the job for, and why are you choosing that? What is it about that period of time that you think would enable you to achieve what you hope for, what the head hopes for, what the governors hope for? So it's not the number of years. You don't even have to say a number of years. You could say something like, while ever I am still, or as long as I, or as long as we, or as long as you. So I think that's a good question. I've been asked some ridiculous questions over the years, but I think thinking about the question work is most useful.
Well, do you know what's coming next, Jill and Noreen, and Ken and Stephen? Do you know what's coming next? We are going to have a little mock interview, okay? Because we've got a governor, Noreen, we've got the head teacher, Dr. Jill Berry, and we've got our 2 candidates, Kenneth and Stephen. Kenneth and Stephen, are you nervous about this interview?
Well, considering that it's the first time that I found out that it's happening, Tom, and then yes, I would say yes.
Well, Jill is going to decide which one out of you 2 is going to get the job at the end, which I think it's incredibly mean. But it's not mean spirited. It's all in the spirit of sort of going through some horrible questions. So are you 2 ready for this? We're only going to do 3. So you're going to get 3 questions. They're going to be the same questions to each of you. And then Jill and her panel of governors, which consists of 1 governor, Noreen, which is not very fair, is going to decide who's going to get the job. And if Jill can't decide, she can just give the job to both of you. But I get the feeling Jill will decide who gets the job. Are you both ready?
Hit me.
Okay. Stephen, first question. What makes you unique?
That is a very good question. So what makes me unique is that I have a wide range of interests, and those collectively make me who I am. And so, as well as being a computer science teacher, I like making pizza. I occasionally teach a little bit of math, so I like teaching any opportunity that I have about pizza related to math. So fractions are always pizza-related questions. And yeah, it's that collectively that makes me who I am.
Thank you. Kenneth, what makes you unique?
Well, Tom, that's a very good question. Just give me a second while I take some water for my thinking time. Classic.
No problem. Yeah.
Oh, that's really good water. I think what makes me unique is I'm the only person that you're going to offer this job to today. Because of my passion, my drive. I've wanted to be a teacher since I was 12. And if you weren't to offer me this job, then you would be killing that dream. So I think that's what makes me unique in applying for this post that I didn't know I was applying for until about 20 seconds ago.
I vote round one to Kenneth there, I'm afraid.
Right, question 2, Stephen, and then obviously Kenneth, you get. I hope you're taking notes, Noreen and Jill, because this is very important.
How do you get all the thinking time?
This is the most important decision they'll have ever made. Stephen, same question again for you and Kenneth. So, Stephen first. What do you love about teaching?
For me, I've always worked in schools with high levels of disadvantage. So for me, although it sounds a bit of a cliche, I'm all about making a difference to students' lives. So actually getting to know my students, getting to know what barriers they have, getting to know how I can support them. So along the lines of my careers leader role that I have at the moment, actually getting to know them, getting to know what their aspirations are for the future, and actually helping them move towards that goal.
And Kenneth?
I think for me, it's about making a difference. I went through I was heavily influenced by my teachers, the knowledge, the thirst for knowledge that I got. I loved my subject. I loved maths. I loved physics. And I think for me, what I wanted to do was make a difference by passing that on to the next generation. And I think the thing that I now do in my leadership role is making sure that other teachers love their teaching too, and trying to spread that sort of love for our subjects and love for education amongst as many young people in my local area as possible.
Okay, we've got 2 questions left. This is just, I mean, these are silly ones now. Gents, are you ready?
Yeah.
Stephen, why are manholes round? Where are you? What's happened?
There is a mathematical response to this.
Well, as a computer science teacher, I'm going to Google it and I'll let you know.
Kenneth, why are manholes round?
They are round because then the manhole cover will never fall in on itself. If there were any other shape, you would be able to fit like a square. You would be able to sit diagonally and it would fall into the hole down into the manhole, whereas a circle wouldn't do that. I genuinely believe that's the answer. They're round so that they don't fall back into the hole that they are covering.
Do you know what, Kenneth, for the last question, because I feel unfair on Stephen because he's had to answer
that
first,
is also true. I think he should have advantage on.
The last question is, and you obviously going to answer this one first. If you were a tree, what kind of tree would you be and why?
Oh, wow. I can see how difficult this is going first. If I was a tree.
By the way, everybody joining, this is the sort of highbrow chats that we have on Teachers Talk Radio.
I didn't realise it was a comedy educational podcast. Radio show, sorry. No.
Go on. I'm waiting for your answer. We have limited time. Get on with it.
I would be a rowan tree because I like fruit pastels.
Not bad. You just chat GPT'd that.
No, I genuinely haven't.
You chat GPT'd it. You're out. Get out. Despite knowing the answer to the other silly question. Stephen, what tree would you be and why? Go on.
I would be a horse chestnut tree because I'm sturdy, reliable, but also I provide fun with conkers.
Oh my goodness. Right. Well, we need to get serious now because it's time for the feedback session. Noreen and Jill, are you still there? Don't know whether Jill can hear anything. But
yes, I
didn't say it, but I got some of it.
Yeah,
I got the manhole cover.
Noreen is
I got the gist.
Yeah, there was the first 2 questions were were reasonably bad, and then we accelerated through to terrible for the last two. But Noreen, is there anything you would say to the two candidates, and who would you choose? Who would you give the job to?
Oh, I think they both excel. So I'll talk to Jill and recommend that an extra post be created so that we can, because they both complement each other so well that I wouldn't want to lose either of them.
There you go. There you go. Somebody's giving a sympathetic, sad little round of applause because we split the role. Nobody's taking it, unless Jill decides that she's overriding the governors, which I'm sure she would never do.
I was going to say, Tom, I was going to say exactly the same. I'm a huge fan of flexible working. Flexible working is the way of the future. We need to embrace flexible working if we're going to really address the recruitment and retention crisis. And I would say that Stephen and Kenneth have key complementary skills and strengths. And I'm going to suggest a job share so that we can have the brilliance of both of them. And together, the two of them will make more than one successful whole. They will add huge value. So both of them, job share, flexible working. I agree with Noreen.
Oh, brilliant. Well, we're all in agreement. Kenneth and Stephen, how do you feel about sharing the role? Are you okay with that?
I'm okay with sharing the role if we both get the same salary.
I once turned up for my first day of the job and found out it was a job share, and I wasn't told that when I was offered. That was an interesting one.
What?
Yeah, I once arrived to my first day on a job, and I saw one of the other candidates from the day, and I said, "Oh, what did they offer you then?" And they said, "The job that we went for. What about you?" It was a bit awkward, I'll be honest with you.
Oh my God. But then, how did the rest of the conversation go then?
We had a fairly robust chat with the head teacher that day. I think I can say, but never mind.
What the heck? Jill and Noreen, have you ever actually done that? I don't mean giving two people the same job, but I mean, have you ever done the interview and at the end been like, we need to try and keep two of the candidates rather than just the one?
Yes, we've done that once. Again, for the reasons I said before, that the candidates, it wasn't for a headship role, it was for a role on the SLTT. Both had complementary skills. We didn't want to, and we thought both would work really well, and we could split the role and according to their strengths, which again were complementary to each other. So we did do that. And I've done the opposite as well. We've had a situation where we wanted to appoint a head, and none of the candidates. We didn't even go to the interview stage. We looked at the application forms, and we didn't shortlist anyone. And I think governors and people need to be strong enough to think that maybe none of the applicants are strong enough, and there's no point wasting their time and your time. They might be strong candidates, but they may not be what you're looking for. So rather than go through the motions of the interviews and 2-day interviews or what have you, it's much better, I think, to say it right at the start that I'm sorry, none of them meet, but what I'd say is give really good feedback. Whoever is on the interview, whether it's for heads or SLT or teachers, feedback is really important. If you don't get feedback, do ring up and ask, because an interview should prepare you for your next role. If you don't get it, it should still be a preparation for the next time you go for an interview. So people should always give feedback, and if you don't get feedback, do ask for it.
Yeah. Jill, I was wondering for you in your sort of head days, whether there were times where you didn't appoint. I mean, I'm sure there were. Maybe like what Noreen was saying, where it's even pre that stage, or whether there were times where you were like, we want to appoint everybody, and you somehow found a way of doing that.
Yeah, and I think a number of things, really. I've certainly not gone into the interview process thinking about a job share, but I've come out of it thinking about a job share. I think in both cases, they were internal promotions where we had two fantastic people who I thought would work really well together. And in both cases, they were already employed. They're already on a contract. They wanted the experience and they were very happy to work together to build the experience. I've also not appointed, I would never say no one was strong enough. I would say we haven't found the right fit for what we need. So I think I do say to people, when you go for interview, if you're not appointed, it doesn't mean you couldn't do the job. It doesn't even mean you couldn't do it well. It just means someone else is a better match for what the school needs at this point in its journey. So it's not a failure. It's just a lack of alignment. And I absolutely agree with Noreen. I've written a blog post about this, Tom. If anyone looks at my blog, jillberry102.blog, I've written a blog post about schools holding interviews, what I think they need to think about. And I said that people put a lot of time and effort and energy and emotional investment into preparing applications to going through the process. The least a school can do is give them some constructive, useful feedback to help them on their journey. So I absolutely agree. And I'm very disgruntled with schools that say we have a policy of not giving feedback, or they give feedback that's so bland and generic it's no use at all. So help the people who have invested in applying for your school, even if they weren't the right match, help them for the future. I think that's really important.
That's really powerful. I'm going to ask you all now this last bit, and it's sort of going back. Well, we've got two more things to ask, but this is the penultimate. This was keeping on the theme of the interview lessons. This was a tweet from Cordelia, who said, interview lessons should be with a current class at your current school. So much of teaching is about routines and how well you know the kids, building on what you did the previous lesson. A lesson with kids you've never met before says very little about how well you teach. I wondered whether you agree or disagree with this approach. I'll start with Stephen and then we'll go around from there. Stephen, what are your thoughts on that?
I really like the thoughts of it. So this idea does keep going round. I've not actually seen or heard from anyone actually doing it.
I don't know.
I'd really love to see if schools actually do that, and whether schools would be willing. I think sometimes you've obviously got, you got the strange thing of, do you tell your head teacher that you're looking around if you are? At what point do you tell your head teacher? Do you wait until you've got shortlisted somewhere, etc.? But yeah, it's interesting. It'd be interesting to know whether head teachers would be willing to let people come in and see the class, how that dynamic would work. But I agree. So much of it is to do with relationships with your current students, and actually, doing an interview lesson where you don't know the students. Sometimes the data that you've been given, if you've been given any, is quite sketchy. I've in the past been told to prepare to teach top set class and be given a nurture group, and then told I'd set it too high for them. It would be very interesting to see people who've been teaching a class for a long time, their routines are in place, etc., and just getting a flavour for what they're like on a day-to-day basis, where perhaps there's less stress and less pressure than actually just, rocking up and teaching a class that you've never met before. So I like the thought of it. I think, there would be the obvious questions of how would you get it to work, the travel for the recruiting school, etc. I think it's highly impractical unless you can find a way of doing it remotely, although that obviously opens its own issues. But yeah, I like the thought of it, just it'd be quite hard to deliver, I think.
Kenneth, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, it was one of the tweets that I sent out last week with someone, talking about it. And for me, if teaching is what is the bread and butter of what that role is about, then we need to let them teach. But there is a massive amount of unfairness that I don't think we'll ever get round. We know it's not a typical lesson when we observe candidates, but a skilled observer should be able to see the key skills in action, the building the relationships, like I said earlier, talking to kids. What I think is challenging and we need to think about as, we go through our recruitment and selection process is the question around fairness if there's an internal candidate. There are a lot, in my experience, a lot of internal candidates for jobs or people doing acting or on short term, fixed term, whatever it happens to be. If they've already got the relationship, then they're going to be better, you know, when it comes to these kids, because even if they've not taught the kids before, the kids still know them from being around the school, will see their face, etc. I think there is scope for seeing the teacher in the best light, but one of the biggest things that I was thinking about there, as Stephen was talking, was even filming the main part of their lesson, you know, the first 15-20 minutes, and having a panel look at that. But how much would you be putting off candidates from applying when you tell them, well, film 20 minutes, and then there's the issue around if the kid's voice is on it, the data protection and all that kind of stuff. But I do genuinely think as well that some candidates, you know, they memorize stock responses for interviews, so teaching is much more realistic what they would do. But at the same time, I've seen excellent lessons, you know, that all lessons, you know, when I go round and do my observations of my own colleagues, they put on their best show. Of course they do. I put on my best show when my readers, you know, come in and observe me. But it's about the observer. I think it's about picking up those kind of nuanced things about the skills that they have, what is genuine and what is a performance, or, you know, or what looks natural and what doesn't. I think that's the important thing.
Yeah. Jill, any sort of further comments on that, on the whole idea of going to another school and going to the person's school and seeing them teaching there?
I think in some respects it's a great idea, but I think the logistics of it are difficult. I've known it happen once. Since I finished headship, I've supported quite a few governing bodies appointing heads and senior leaders in different schools. And there was one London school where all the shortlisted candidates were local, and the governors agreed to go into their schools to watch them teach a lesson in their current school. And I thought it was great in some respects, but obviously normally it's not so easy. I think the thing to remember is that we all have to teach new classes. Every year we teach new classes. If it's a senior school setup, you're teaching quite a number of new classes. So the interview lesson is like watching, if you like, the first lesson you might teach with a new group, where you're getting to know them, you're assessing their level, you're establishing yourself, you're building a relationship. I don't think that's a terrible thing to do. And although I think that we do want to reduce the fear in interviews, we can't necessarily eliminate the element of stress altogether. If teaching an unfamiliar class is stressful, we need to be able to get over it. We still need to be able to perform and do our job.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's absolutely necessary, but it is an interesting idea.
Yeah. Noreen, any sort of final thoughts on that one?
I agree with Jill that it's interesting. If it can be done, that would be good. One thing I'd throw into the mix is that if you've got a candidate, an external one as well as an internal one, does teaching a class in the school where the job is give a sort of slight advantage to the internal candidate or not? So maybe this, if you have that situation, maybe it might be an idea to try and see if you can go and see the external candidate teaching in their school. So you've seen both of them teaching a class or in their own school, maybe.
Yeah. To level it out, you mean, a bit, sort of thing.
Yes.
Yeah. No, good point. Okay, final question for all of you, and I'll start this time with Noreen, actually, and then we'll work round from there. If you had to choose one or the other, Noreen, of keeping either the interview lesson that a candidate has to do or the interview itself. So let's imagine that the interview day is only made up of the interview and an interview lesson. Nothing else happens. There's no tours, there's no like tasks, there's nothing. It's the interview and the interview lesson, and you can only keep one of those two things. Which one of those would you keep?
Well, as the governor, I'm only involved in interviewing SLT and heads, and usually a lesson isn't part of the interview process there. But if I were a head and we're looking at appointing a teacher, I'd keep the interview, because then you can sort of dig in more into various aspects of their craft.
Yeah, I mean, well, I'll go to Jill. Jill, do you agree with Noreen there? You've got to keep one or the other. It's either this is for a teacher interview, middle leader interview, senior, whatever, right? They've got it. There's a teaching capacity there. It's either you keep the interview lesson or the interview. You have to choose one or the other to keep.
I think if it's a teaching post, I would want to see them teach above all else. If it's a leadership role, I'd want to talk to them about leadership and give them scenarios and give them tasks. But it's a bit of a false situation, Tom, because you're never going to pare it down to that extent, are you?
Jill, I never promised you anything with this show when I invited you on. I didn't guarantee it was going to be quality. I just said it was an invite to come on. Carry on.
Okay. No, that's it, Tom. That would be my answer.
Stephen, have you got anything on this, on a one or the other?
Yeah, before I answer, I was thinking before of, going back to the original question of what would you add or take away. I was originally thinking about the question of would you X or Y when both are important. Those sort of questions are quite interesting. Yes,
don't
I can see both sides.
Show, Stephen, right? Yeah, don't slate it. Come on.
But anyway, yeah. So yeah, I think I agree with Jill. Actually, it would be the lesson if it's predominantly a teaching role, because actually it's important to see what they're like in the classroom, see what their pedagogy is like, see how they get an understanding of whether the students made progress or not, and what they do about it. For me, leadership roles, it would be more about the interview. I did go to an assistant head interview once where they started the day by saying, "You'll see that we've not given you a lesson by this stage. We would expect you to be good teachers." And I agree with that, but actually, I do think I'd like to see the lesson from everyone. But yeah, lesson more important for teachers, interview more important for leaders, I think, overall.
And finally, Kenneth, are you keeping the lesson or the interview?
I am going to be really conventional and agree with everyone so far. I think absolutely classroom teacher, I would want to see the lesson. That is the absolute bread and butter. If it is a middle leadership role or beyond, they've got their most influence by, getting other members of staff on board with their vision, their values, and they can actually influence the learning and teaching, especially in middle leadership. I'm doing an ED, I'm doing a doctorate in middle leadership with a specific look at middle leadership, and they are closest to the classroom and closest to be able to influence the learning and teaching, heads of department and middle leaders. So for me, the interview itself, the actual core interview for leadership positions, but for me, if candidates are coming to teach in a school that I'm working in, I want to see them teach.
Fantastic. Listen, we're just starting to wrap up now. I want to say a massive thanks to Jill, to Stephen, to Kenneth, and to Noreen for calling in. It's been a wonderful conversation about in-school interview days. If you've enjoyed listening, make sure you click follow on Teachers Talk Radio, and of course, follow all our guests too from this evening. They're all fantastic, so that would be a good idea. And also, if you're listening back to this as a podcast, then obviously click follow and subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts from. And if you want to leave, if you've enjoyed this and you've listened all the way through and you've got this far, well, first of all, thank you. And second of all, do drop us a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever it is that you listen to Teachers Talk Radio. We appreciate that and thank you. A final shout out to our sponsor tonight, which is John Catt Educational. If you want to find out more about their new releases, you can visit them at johncattbookshop.com and you can use the code JCTTR2324 to get 20% off your order. We will be back tomorrow with many more shows on TTR. I think Hannah is on tomorrow. Hannah, you can emoji me if that is the case. But I do believe that Hannah is on at 7:30 tomorrow night. So you've got that to look forward to. And many, many more shows all coming up this week and this weekend on TTR. Keep listening and we will see you very, very soon again.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.